now. And take it away, Tom. Welcome to our Beaver Tom Talks.
Welcome. This version of Tom Talks is one that was on our list from early on in doing the Tom Talks in 2020, 21. It was one that someone asked me to do that in 2005 or 2010. I'd been doing a lot of work on stream work along the Nipperson Creek, and it would have, I mean, it was interesting to me, but not sort of marginal to my work on Nipperson. I really didn't see a strong connection between the two. That changed a lot in just a few years after that. And by today, I realize that beaver are really critical to understanding streams and how they work here in the Midwest. So it went from being a very small marginal issue to becoming an extremely important issue. In particular, I'll work on oak reproduction during the over the last 15 years. It all ended up centering around mice and voles and predators and all that, how oak trees reproduce, and working with our agricultural ecologist on bison. And we have some goat grazing going on. Well, I guess the point I'm making here is how wildlife, which I'm really not a wildlifer, how wildlife has worked its way into my research, and the importance of wildlife and really so many different processes as they operate in ecosystems out there. So it's really become an important issue for me, which is why I chose to do it this year. So let's get going. This is kind of before the start. This is a paper I published on Nipperson Creek and its dechannelization. The dechannelization was done in 99, 2000. I started working for the district in 2004. Was continuing to do work along the stream for the next few years, and then decided to write this paper. I think in 2008, 9, I was writing or 2007 and 8, I was writing the paper. It was published in 2009. To write this paper, I had probably gone to dozens and dozens of articles on streams and stream meandering and stream incision, and we'll talk more about some of these terms later. But everything I could find to learn about how streams work, and not one of those articles ever used the word beaver. This would have been 2007 and 8. And so it didn't really occur to me. And I wrote the paper, did the research. But within a few years after that, continuing to look through literature, the subject of beaver started coming up more and more often. And it really caused me to rethink really some of the things I talked about in this article and things I'll present today. How common were beaver? I mean, most of us, well, I assume all of us on the call today know about beaver as a native animal, and there are around 10 to 15 million of them in North America today. And it's estimated that well prior to European settlement, we're talking about getting back before European influence, 300 years ago, there could have been as many as 100 to 200 million, 10 to 20 times as many beaver as there are today. Huge numbers, and those disappeared very rapidly in New England first with the early settlement, and then the wave of beaver trapping moved through the Midwest really in the early and mid 18th century. So really by 1800 to the very early 1800s, when McHenry County was being settled, beaver had already been gone for a considerable period of time. They were stripped from the landscape rapidly, and it was both the work of the classic trapper you see on the right-hand side. That's the one we know from movies and stories about the Old West. But a greater number of native peoples took part in the trapping also, because native peoples really starting, I mean, the image there is of the Dutch in New England. So this is going back to the 17th century. the native peoples bringing furs to the Dutch and getting trade goods in return. Iron for weapons, pots and pans, things that were vital or became vital to the survival of Indian peoples because they were being pressured by Europeans who were taking their land, and they were being pressured by other tribes whose land had already been taken, and they were migrating into conflict with one another. So that story played itself out across the whole of North America, and really in a remarkably small amount of time, anywhere from 200 million or more beaver pretty much disappeared from the North American landscape. Here I'm going to go through a little bit of math that will seem pretty quick and dirty, but there's a purpose behind this. If you figure a lodge of beaver has 2 to 8 beaver, and if you're looking at these numbers of, I think I used 200 million beaver dam, or these numbers here, 100 to 200 is 20 to 80 million beaver dams prior to European influence. And 3.5 million miles of streams and rivers in North America, which means there would be a beaver dam every 370 feet. Now that seems like pretty sloppy math because some of the rivers like the Mississippi or the Missouri River, Ohio, some of the big rivers are too big for beaver. But I do math like this just to get a ballpark sort of order of magnitude estimate on what the numbers could be. Some studies in Canada, in areas where they're no longer being trapped for beaver, in 13 studies, the average was 22 beaver dams for every kilometer of stream. That's a beaver dam every 150 feet. So less than half of that crude number. I came up with some sort of ballpark calculations. So there were an awful lot of beaver prior to European American influence. And the model of the free-flowing stream, and we'll talk about that model later in the presentation, of a free-flowing meandering stream, there are some serious problems if we apply it uncritically to the Midwestern landscape. If we really want to understand how our streams and wetlands worked prior to European American settlement, there's at least a paradigm view that is important to ecological restoration. We really need to put beaver into our thought processes and calculations. This is a realization, even though I've really been thinking about the importance of beaver now for probably 10 years. I didn't put it together because I've known this map. This is a public land survey map, and this is right there is where Lost Valley Visitor Center is. So this is Glacial Park in the view only in 1837. And so I pulled this map out and used it for a variety of presentations, but it never really occurred to me that this picture of Nipperson Creek, this linear stream wandering through the landscape of what's now Glacial Park, is already the picture of a stream that's had the beaver removed from it. Likewise, this picture from 1872, really all these pictures of Nipperson Creek through the years, here it's been channelized in 54 and then being put back into its meandering channels. And I'm not sure where those yellow marks came from. We'll try to ignore them for now. Putting back into its meandering channel around 2000. This is a stream that's fundamentally different than the Nipperson Creek that flowed through this landscape for thousands of years before that. That would have been a series of beaver dams. That realization of how massively our streams and small rivers have changed has really hit me a lot in these last few years. Let's think a little about beaver as an organism, and just quickly look at beaver evolution. If you tuned into the Darwin podcast a year or two ago, you know how interesting I find the whole evolution idea. Just look quickly at where beavers sit in rodent evolution. Here you have the whole rodent clade, or all the rodents, of which there are many, many species. That you divide the squirrel clade from all these others, divide again to get guinea pigs and all these others. And this division leads to the clade or evolutionary group that includes beaver. This gets a little bit more complicated, doesn't it? But relax here. This is where rodents originate here. These are evolutionary splits. So this is the mammalian evolution that splits here and creates the group that eventually will have primates, of which there are gorillas, humans, chimpanzees. And then this split right here creates the rodent group, which is all these squirrels, guinea pigs, mice, voles, but also beaver, which is an interesting group, but there was only 2 beaver species left in the world today, and they're all across the northern hemisphere of Europe and Asia. Castor fiber, which is European and Asian, and then Castor canadensis. And those two divide a little bit less than 10 million years ago when Castor fiber makes its way from Asia into Alaska and then down into North America. And somewhere along that route, probably very early on, it underwent a chromosomal change so that the chromosome numbers between these two are not quite the same, so they can't interbreed anymore. But they look the same, they act the same, they have the same habits. And so beaver either as an opportunity for a restoration or as a problem for people is really the same in Europe and North America. This is a look a little bit more closely at beaver species and where the things we automatically associate with beaver like dam building are fairly recent. Again, here less than 10 million years ago, probably just before that split between North American and European Asian beaver. It becomes a dam builder, and we can go back in the woody plant diet is starting around 30 million years ago, and we'll look a little bit more at that ancestral beaver. So this habit of building dams is only for one small branch of this beaver family. They just happen to be the ones that are common today and that we associate with the name beaver. The giant beaver, which at least many of you have heard about, which lived up until around 11,000 years ago in North America. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that not only didn't make dams, it was a creature of wetlands, but it ate soft wetland plants, had lost its woody plant habit of eating woody plants, and it wasn't a dam builder. So it disappeared about 11,000 years ago. Skulls tell you a lot about what animals do. This is the beaver skull here, and you can see it's true of a number of rodents, not just beaver. The teeth, very stout teeth, the massive jaws, this huge cheekbone or zygomatic arch to which the muscles of the jaw attach. So an animal that's built to chew really, really tough things. The teeth are reinforced with iron, which precipitates out on the surface of the teeth, and that creates a very hard layer in front here. And later on, we'll watch a video where they'll talk about self-sharpening. And the way that happens is the back of the tooth is relatively softer than this iron plate, not iron plate, but iron oxide reinforced surface. And so as that softer side wears away, the sharp edge of this iron layer keeps those beaver teeth very sharp for chewing. You can see it again in the muskrat. But the muskrat is an animal that eats mostly soft vegetation, has much longer teeth, a much thinner zygomatic arch, so it really doesn't need those massive jaw muscles. And the only reason I put the squirrel in here is to show this difference between an animal that lives in the water where its eyes have migrated to the top of its skull so that its nose and eyes are out of water when it's swimming. And here is a land-based rodent that runs and jumps through the trees, and it needs not only larger eyes, but ones that can focus forward, so with a binocular vision. So when that squirrel in my backyard jumps from the tree to the bird feeder, it knows where to land. This is Paleocastor. So this is that ancestral beaver of the whole line that would end up creating giant beaver and modern beavers. And one of the mistakes we make in thinking about evolution is you think everything about the animal must be an adaptation to the thing that animal is doing today. Like the large jaws and teeth of the beaver must be an adaptation to chewing wood. Well, they're almost as well developed in this 35-million-year-old beaver ancestor, and it turns out that this wasn't a a wood eater at all, but rather used its teeth for digging burrows and actually dug these interesting corkscrew burrows in the ground, which are then fossilized when lime-rich sediments get down into the corkscrew. Um, so this these massive jaws and teeth were originally an adaptation to digging burrows and then were co-opted later on in evolution and natural selection to be specialized for chewing down trees. This is the giant beaver, which was not quite as tall, well, from nose to tail, longer than a person is tall, but considerably heavier, up to 350 pounds. Compare that to the modern beaver. I'll just call this out. Every time you see a picture that's early man, caveman, this is presumably a picture of a native North American of sometime prior to European American settlement. It's always a male. It's always a man. It's never a woman. Half of them were women, and yet those silhouettes, those pictures are always of men. I would have never realized that before the last few years. But here we have the giant beaver skull, huge, so much larger, but look at how closely. So even though we got a one evolutionary split here, another evolutionary split here, another one split here that separates modern beaver from giant beaver, the skulls are virtually identical, except that one is much larger than the other. Even though the giant beaver really wasn't eating wood, it still retained almost the same huge zygomatic arch and strong skull of the modern beaver. Now let's talk a little bit about beaver ecology, a little bit more closely related to what we're going to talk mostly about today, which is how they work in damming streams and really changing the whole ecology of the Midwestern landscape. Beavers mate for life. They breed in January, March. The kits are born in April and June. Why is it that all young mammals always look so cute? This one is cute with a capital C. 1 to 8 kits, so they're capable of very rapid population growth. Mothers nurse their young like other placental mammals. Interesting with beaver, the young don't leave at the end of the first year. Rather, they stay in the lodge with the adults for 2 years. So in one lodge will be the young of that year. So let's say in the summer of 2024, there will be the parents. There will be the kits born in the spring of that year, and there will be the young from the previous year, all living in the same lodge. They leave at sexual maturity at the end of that second year, and that's when they leave and they're looking for new territories, is when they're most susceptible to predation, because beaver, when they're in a lodge and in a territory that's flooded, they're pretty much isolated from predators. We'll talk more about lodge structure later, but they're really isolated from predators, but during that dispersal phase, they're quite vulnerable. Wolves would have probably been the major predator of beaver for most of their existence. Beaver can live quite a long time, 10 to 12 years, up to 19 years in captivity. One of the interesting things about beaver is that the sexual organs are from the outside appearance are the same because of the cloaca, an enclosure that encloses sexual organs of both male and female. Inside of that are not only the sexual organs and from excretory organs, but also oil glands on either side of the anus that the beaver uses to oil its fur to keep it waterproof. And there's also the castoreum glands, and castoreum is a chemical the beavers use for scent marking, but later on became valuable to trappers because it's used in, at least was, I think maybe still is used in perfume manufacture. So a number of interesting things about beaver. One of the fascinating things is they eat their food twice. The first time they eat it, they excrete this dark greenish brown pellet on the left. that still has quite a bit of nutrition in it. So they eat that again and then later excrete this thing that looks like a pile of cellulose fibers on the right. So it's a double digestion. Rabbits do the same thing. So this is evolved in a number of different mammal groups, but it is in beaver also. So they will eat the same food twice. And some of those pellets, I know some of the rabbit pellets in the backyard are my dog's favorite snack. And it must be these early pellets that still have quite a bit of nutrition in them. Beaver use their tail for a number of reasons. One is to store fat, and that fat is then an essential energy source during winter and times of short food supply. Many mammals store fat and use it as a winter food supply. To regulate body temperature, because the tail is hairless, it means it has the potential to lose heat very rapidly. And so how does an animal control heat loss when it's hairless? Well, we should know that because human beings are basically hairless over most of our body. And we do that by shunting blood flow in capillaries in the skin surface. You either open up those capillaries and your skin turns red, and that will happen when you're really hot, because what your body is doing is opening up those capillaries near the surface to warm up the skin surface, to release heat to the outside air. When it's cold, you turn pale because that body is shunted inside and not to the skin surface, exactly what a beaver does. And because it doesn't have a hairy tail, it can then use that tail to either quickly or slow down its loss of heat to the outside world. And the other one is to signal. And I thought for people that hadn't heard of beaver signal, I picked up this went off the internet. I think if I fast forward here a little bit. There you go. I've often been walking along streams. That's about all you know of the beaver is when you hear that flopping sound. And the beaver don't use their tail as, unlike seals or otters, beaver don't use their tails as a means of propulsion in the water. They're really using it. It just sort of dangles behind them and may use it as a bit of a rudder. But they're really using their web feet. And this little video here really shows the beaver swimming very nice. So see how those large hind feet are really doing the propulsion. The tail is hanging behind, it flops a bit. But notice how, and I'll point this out later, notice how it carries its front feet right under its chin as it's swimming. See if we can forward our way to the next scene. Hold on. Just let it run. Sorry, hung up here. Easiest way to do this is to get out. There we go. I'm sorry. Okay, so we know a little bit about beaver biology. Let's look at beaver dams and dam building.
Takes great strength, skill, and patience. One technique is to slice halfway through and let the wind do the rest.
Nature videos always have this sort of voice like.
The beaver's incisors are strengthened with iron, which makes them orange. They grow continuously and even self-sharpen. The pond makes it easier to move around the heavy logs they need to build their dams. Out of the water, it's a struggle. Stones help weigh down the base. The whole family works together, carefully interlocking the timber.
Take a look, just watch this, how the beaver are doing this.
They
We're going to
dredge
see a
mud from the
number of
pond
pictures of the
bottom to
beaver
seal
dam
the
later on in
dam.
the presentation.
Each pond traps several inches of sediment every year, so there's plenty of it.
Okay, so now we're going to look at some beaver dams, and this is a beaver dam on Cowpie Creek, which is a little creek in Glacial Park. This is a picture taken during the summer. You see a lot of woody material here. When I revisited this, you'll see some videos of Cowpie Creek here in a few minutes. Most of the woody material is gone, and the dam is mostly mud and herbaceous material. So beaver are really flexible in using whatever they can get their hands on. We always think of the classic beaver dam as trees, but they can use other materials, and mud ends up being a really important part of the dam. That one's probably, I'm just guessing 2 meters, it's a little more than 6 feet across in some of these areas, because it's a really tiny little stream. The largest beaver dam anyone knows about in the world is up in northern Alberta. This is 835 meters, so nearly a kilometer long, about a half a mile from one end to the other. So pretty amazing creatures. They can inhabit lots of different sorts of situations. Wherever water is moving, the beaver will try to dam it up. And here are some pictures from our wildlife camps here in McHenry County of beaver building a dam at Stickney Run. Beaver almost look thoughtful as they're doing this. I don't know what's going through a beaver's mind. It's not a very fast moving creature. Whether they're simply responding to instinctual urges, or whether there's some sort of looking at particular situations and fitting particular kinds of sticks in here and there. This is the same photograph during the day, and I just left that in there. That's a river otter. How other animals are using these beaver dams. Critical part of really recovering the original wetland ecology of a landscape is reintroducing or allowing beaver to re-inhabit a landscape. This is a beaver dam at Winding Creek. Just this is just outside of our property. Wildlife ecologist Brenna Ness was called in to take a look at this to make sure it wasn't on our property, and she took a picture of it. Beautiful beaver dam. And this is an aerial view of this landscape over a few years. So this is before the beaver dam in 2018. 2021, the dam has been built, and you see this area, formerly pretty dry looking, is now looking very wet. By 2022, maybe just at a higher water period of time, you see even more water. So this would have been the natural state of most of McHenry County streams long prior to European influence, is that they would have been the series of these beaver impoundments.
Hey, Tom, we got a
Yep.
question in the chat. I have a feeling you're gonna get to this later, but what happens to beaver dams that are on park grounds?
Or on what?
On district properties?
Oh, we're going to get to that later. Just a quick preview. We try to leave them. We can't always leave them, depending on how they influence neighbors. But we'll talk more about that later.
Okay, and while I got your attention, I have one idea for how to get rid of those yellow lines. We can
Yeah.
try it, and if it doesn't work, we'll just continue
Okay.
to ignore them. So, if you can hover over the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you see those little presentation icons. There should be one that looks like a pen. That's basically for markup.
Yeah.
So it looks like it's not through there. So that would have been one option to erase. But
Well, I don't
otherwise,
know where they.
if you hover over the
where they
top of the
came from.
screen, that like zoom window when it comes down,
Yeah.
sometimes there's an option for notes, or whiteboards. So if you have any of those turned on, there might be an option in
No, I
there.
don't think I have them turned on. Well, there's no. I just may have turned it on. Okay. I
All
think.
right,
I'm
we'll
sorry
just
they're
leave it for now.
distracting. Honestly, I didn't see them a half hour ago, so I'm not sure what happened. Anyway,
That's okay. We'll
I don't
ignore
think
them.
so.
Thanks for your patience, everybody.
We're gonna look at another beaver dam here in Glacial Park. This is Hart's Road. So when you're coming into the park, you're coming off Route 31 to the right of the screen. This is Hart's Road parking. There's the Prairie Trail. This is Powers Walker House and the gravel road. Just want you to know where you are. So there's a beaver dam just in here, not really very far off the road. Yeah, I went in here. Wasn't quite as cold as it's been these last few days, but it was pretty cold. It was already icy, and so we had to break our way through the ice. I think Lewis and Clark would have been proud of us that day, smashing our way through the ice to get in. And Jackie was right behind us, and I think thought it was a game, but this playful music, it was anything but fun up in front. But here we're standing on the beaver dam there. I didn't estimate the length of that. It was probably at least 30, 40 meters long. The beaver lodge is just over to the left here. This is the beaver pond. Yeah, here is the lodge, just to the left of the previous photograph. What's in front of it is called the cache. It's not just stray sticks. The beaver put those sticks there, and the sticks are used for several different reasons. They can be used for repairing the lodge and the dam, quick supply of building material, but probably more importantly, at this time of year, they're a food supply during the winter. Interestingly, the ones that are sticking out probably aren't going to be the food supply. The choice sticks that are used for food are the ones that are stuck. They stick them in the mud under the water so that the stick doesn't get frozen into the ice and can be easily removed by the beaver for feeding during the winter. So, yeah, all the lodges we looked at this fall all had that cache of material near the lodge. Here we have this beautiful beaver pond and dam here. It's in Glacial Park. It's in Lost Valley. Hart's Road is several hundred yards that way. It felt like a half mile as we were walking in, but probably just a few hundred yards. So it's a big dam. We're raising the water level a couple of feet, but that really doesn't threaten Hart's Road. It doesn't threaten any private property owners, so we can leave it here as a natural feature, right? Interesting natural feature. But what do we do, Brenna, when the dam does threaten district infrastructure or maybe a private landowner?
Sure. Well, like you said, Tom, beavers are very good at what they do at damming water and removing trees, which can be a problem. So we oftentimes will get calls from our neighbors or our farmers who are being impacted by flooding or damage to the property. And so in that case, we do respond to every call. We investigate the site, identify if there's a dam or any beaver activity at the site. And we do have a permit from the state to remove the dam or trap the animals if necessary. You have to have a permit just to remove a dam, and so that's really important. And so in the case, the district is very fortunate to have large contiguous tracts of protected land where beavers can do what they do, but there are also many cases where the impacts are detrimental. So sometimes we do have to manage those nuisance animals.
So you trap beaver. Do you ever relocate them on district property?
we do not relocate beavers. There's not really any point to doing that. They are very persistent. They're just going to continue to do what they do. So once they've identified a spot that they like to dam, they're going to return, whether it's that animal or another animal, another beaver.
Thank you. So the answer to the question, I think, was pretty clear. Whenever we can leave a beaver dam, we leave a beaver dam because beaver are really important to wetland restoration. You can see what they're doing right here. The drop across that dam is a couple of feet. So they're raising the water, they're flooding areas. That's great for wetland restoration. What it's not great for is if it's flooding some item of district infrastructure, or even more problematic when it bothers a neighbor and we start having neighbor issues. Sometimes we can work with the neighbor in finding ways around that. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the intricacies of beaver management later, but sometimes we can't. So let's go back to Cowpie Creek. When we looked at Cowpie Creek just a few weeks ago, we found 7 dams. This is Keystone Road over here. Fairly busy road on the west side of the park. This is Valley Road that cuts really across the park by the Region 1 shops, and just north of the Lost Valley Visitor Center. So we're gonna the next scene, we're gonna be right here in Cowpie Creek.
We're right next to Cowpie Creek. Funny little name given by the district crews when they re-meandered this stream back in the late 1990s. Keystone Road is immediately to my left. You can hear the cars as they go by. We're going to walk from here, from where Cowpie Creek comes under Keystone Road to where it goes under Valley Road up ahead. And we're going to go through 7 or 8 really small beaver dams along the stream, and we're going to look at the drop in elevation across each of the beaver dams, and then total those together and compare that to the overall drop of the stream through this reach of Cowpie Creek. We're at the first of the riffles along Cowpie Creek. You can look at it here. It's very narrow because the stream corridor is very narrow, but actually quite a bit of drop across here. So the first thing we're going to do is measure this drop, and then we'll go to the next riffle.
All right, the question is, why would I do that other than liking to measure things and use things like that surveying rod and the silver colored object dangling from around my neck as a hand level. What we're going to do here is to look at the drop across all 7 of those dams, and then compare. We sum all those drops together, then compare it to the whole drop of the stream over that same distance, and see how much of that is taken up by beaver dams. Just to look at a few of the dams along the stream. Again, these pictures here were taken during the summer. Here are pictures, and here are the 1 foot first dam, 0.9, 0.4, so one dam that's over 2 feet, all of them totaling a little over 8 feet, and the drop from Keystone Road to Valley Road is about 10. So about 81% of that drop is taken up by beaver dams. What that means is there's very little free-flowing stream along Cowpie Creek. I suspect if you look at where the beaver dams start, there's this stretch here where the stream drops quite a way, and there is not one beaver dam. And I suspect that's just because of the noise of Keystone Road. It's a very busy road. Large vehicles go down there, and I suspect the noise and vibration of that. And if you took the drop simply from this part of the stream to there, you would probably have something closer to 100% rather than just the 81%. My point here is that when you let beaver do what they do, most of the stream's distance is then taken up by beaver dams and pools, and most of the drop of the stream is taken up by the drop across the beaver dam, meaning there's very little free-flowing stream. And what a free-flowing stream does is it erodes its banks, It does bank erosion and it does bed erosion. And if you turn a free flowing stream into a series of ponds, it's no longer eroding in that way. So now let's look at one more beaver dam on Cowpie Creek. This Cowpie we were in before is to the left of this picture. Here's Valley Road. Here's Cowpie Creek as it more water is joining. It gets a little bit larger, and there's a beaver dam right here to the north of Valley Road. This is a long dam, probably 50 meters long from one end to the other. Mostly made of woody material and cattails all woven together in mud. In fact, a few rocks along here, just as you saw in that video. The change in elevation across the dam is a couple of feet. There's the lodge again, and there's the cache right next to the lodge. Two things you'll see together at this time of year. Now we're going to talk a little bit about our stream restoration practices here in the district and how that relates to beaver.
What you're looking at now are what we call rock riffles. These were constructed.
Whoops.
What you're looking at now.
Okay.
What you're looking at now are what we call rock riffles. These were constructed in
Here's our riffle here.
Jackie will pan around and show another riffle immediately downstream. These were put in 2005 to raise the stream level.
Here's the second one.
Essentially very low rock dams, that we call them riffles. And we did this because we had discovered through some research that the stream had eroded down well below its former stream level, at least long before European settlement. We can actually look at old stream meanders, artifacts left out in the valley, and measure their elevation and see that they're considerably higher than the stream is operating today. So the question that I was asking myself back in 2003-4 was, why would the stream entrench a couple of feet lower than it was prior to European settlement, when it had had over 16,000 years of time to do that erosion, and it didn't, and then suddenly after settlement the stream erodes? And there are obviously a lot of changes in agricultural land drainage and all that, and that was the only explanation I had at the time. But within a few years I came up on the beaver hypothesis, not mine originally. I picked it up through some reading, and then suddenly it made sense. This valley wasn't a broad, flat valley with a little linear stream running through it. It was a series of beaver ponds, and that's why the stream didn't entrench for that vast amount of time over those thousands of years, because it was a series of ponds. It wasn't a linear stream capable of down cutting into the sediment. So this is one of the things we figured out through research here, and we're putting into effect now with the rock dams. We can't really let beaver dam Nipperson Creek because this is the most heavily canoed and kayak stream in the Chicago area, and it just wouldn't work with that level of human interaction. But we're using some rock replacements, you might say, to raise the stream level today to something close to what it was long prior to European settlement.
Okay, here we go. So what we're doing, the riffles along Nipperson Creek were a deliberate attempt to raise the stream levels to something close to what they were long prior to European American settlement. We were really doing that work and starting that work before we really put the beaver hypothesis together. But it's all of those things are coming together now. So here, let's take a look at these beaver lodges. Beaver, as I say, adult beaver, once they're established in an area, they're really, they don't suffer a lot from predation because they spend a lot of time in these lodges. And the lodges have a below water entrance, so wolves or coyotes can't get into the lodge. But the beaver can get in there, move out whenever they need to feed, and then right back in again. So they're pretty well protected from predators. It's really only in that time of dispersal. Here are some wildlife cam pictures of beaver disappearing into those burrows they dug into the banks of of a stream. We sort of think of beaver as medium-sized animals, and I suppose they are, but we also think of raccoons as medium-sized animal. Beaver are a lot larger. Beaver can get up to 60, 70 pounds, maybe even larger. So they're really large, pretty large creatures. These are smaller beaver, probably beaver of that year. This looks like a dormant season picture. So probably these are beaver that have basically 1 year to grow. Still a lot smaller than the adult, but probably all brothers and sisters of one family. Here is the classic lodge you've seen already, which is built up above water. Its base is below water and its entrance is below water. So again, beaver are protected from surface predators. Another beaver lodge, this one at Stickney Run. I mean, this has changed a lot since I've been working here since 2004. And beaver were not really a common part of our natural area landscape at the time. I remember walking Cowpie Creek and not finding a single dam in the early 2000s. So beaver populations have increased markedly over the last few decades. What I want to talk about now is really where I met beaver in a sense. And that was by studying Nippersink Creek for years, studying it, spending literally hundreds of hours along the stream, measuring and studying it and documenting its changes and puzzling over how the stream could have changed so much in recent time and so little in a very long period of time before that. So let's take a look. First, let's look at what we're going to do is look at the classic. This is classic stream or fluvial, other 25-cent word, fluvial geomorphology view of streams and linear streams and their eroding and meandering. So, but let's get an understanding of this, and then we'll talk about how beaver changed this pattern. Meandering stream. You notice how the meanders are exaggerated and the deposition of these point bar sediments on the inside of the turn. Classic stream meandering pattern. Now this short video will show how the meandering can be so exaggerated that meanders eventually cut themselves off and shorten the stream to create this oxbow feature. And if we look, incidentally, beaver are northern hemisphere creatures. There are no beaver in Africa, Australia, South America. The southern continents don't have beaver. And so when we look at rivers and streams in South America, we're looking at streams that evolved by this classic linear stream eroding, meandering, cutting off oxbows. And you see this pattern here in a river. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. This is in Brazil. You can see this is an old meander bend that was then cut off, a meander bend that was cut off, another meander bend that was cut off, a meander bend that was cut off, again. So this is a classic pattern we see in rivers or streams that mature in a landscape without beaver. This is the lower Mississippi Valley, a river that's just so large beaver couldn't dam it. And so you see this same pattern. This is a beautiful diagram done, I think, in the early 20th century, trying to diagram all of the old oxbows and old stream meanders in the lower Mississippi River. So that's the classic picture of a meandering stream. And when we look, here, incidentally, the Nippersink does it too. This is a meander of Nippersink Creek that was cut off I'll show you a picture in the 1939 photograph. This is still a part of the stream. Sometime between then and the middle 50s, it was cut off. It cut itself off. And when it cuts itself off, it shortens the stream and increases the stream gradient. And this became, I've always enjoyed Mark Twain. And I remember reading this many years ago, and only a vague understanding of stream geomorphology at the time, but I love his cleverness. So I'm going to read through this. It only takes a minute. In the space of 176 years, the lower Mississippi River has shortened itself 242 miles. What Mark Twain is doing is talking about cutting off meander bends and leaving oxbows, and so he is probably making up some of these numbers. That is an average of a trifle over 1 mile and a third per year. Therefore, any calm person who is not blind or idiotic can see that in the lower Oolitic Silurian period, just 1 million years ago, next November, the lower Mississippi River was upwards of 1,300,000 miles long and stuck over the Gulf of Mexico like a fishing rod. And by the same token, any person can see that 742 years ago, from now, the lower Mississippi will be only 1.75 miles long. There's something fascinating about science. One gets such a wholesale return of conjecture out of such a trifling investment of facts. Classic Mark Twain. I love it, even though as a scientist, he's not giving me much credit. Now let's look at some actual science that I was doing in the early 2000s. These are those surveys of Nippersink Creek. There's the channel of Nippersink Creek here and here, and these are ancient channels of a stream that flowed through the Nippersink Creek Valley long before European settlement. Here's where the present stream, and this is an old meander of the stream of Nippersink Creek. And you can see that not just these two measurements, but many measurements, the average of the depth of the bottom of the stream now, the difference between that and these older meanders was 2 feet. I think I mentioned that in one of the earlier videos. So there's that. There's this entrenchment of the stream, and the size of the stream has gotten bigger since then. That was also puzzling. How could a stream be small in the past and big in the present if it has to be draining the same watershed? Well, part of that answer is that the stream in the present, because there are no beaver and because fields are drained and all of our suburban areas, the landscape is drained, the stream flow goes up rapidly after a rain event. So the stream, in effect, when it's most erosive, is a much larger stream than it was 300 years ago, because all the water from the landscape is dumped into the stream very rapidly after a heavy rain. If you go back 300 years, not only was the landscape not drained, but beaver ponds were slowing down that water flow. So any section of stream that was flowing as a stream channel was carrying a relatively smaller amount of water during those peak flow periods. So even though the total flow of water over a whole year would have to be about the same, it would have flowed out much more evenly. And so you don't need these massively large channels for huge flood pulses. This is a Nippersink Creek where I've looked at some of these old stream channels, and I know, and I've looked at these so long, to me, it immediately says to me, this is not an old meander bend. Maybe this is an old meander bend of Nippersink Creek that was cut off, but this, it's hard to figure out how a stream that's flowing here then becomes a stream flowing there. If anything, the stream should be migrating this way and not that way. Likewise, this is just a separate stream channel. This is an ancient Nippersink Creek, but it's not a slow evolutionary change of this to this. That just doesn't make any sense. What makes sense is that this stream, when it was so shallowly entrenched in the landscape, simply hopped from one course to another during those peak flow events. The stream was flowing really over the surface of that valley, And during these peak flow events, the stream would just reroute itself to a different place. And so we have a valley with just all of these stream meanders just helter-skelter all over the valley, not obviously meander bends of the present course, but rather just whole different stream paths that the Nippersink took across the valley. Incidentally, there is the meander bend. By this is a picture I think relatively recently. You see that stream is cut off. But now let's look back in time. This is 1939. Here you can see it's actually a part of the stream. I got a little bit of a close-up. There is that meander bend that was a part of Nippersink Creek. So the whole pattern of meandering and cutting off meanders is still taking place. Of course, this is now a Nippersink Creek without Beaver, and so the stream is very rapidly, the meander bends are moving very rapidly outward with time and eventually cutting themselves off, as this one did somewhere in the 1950s. We talk about stream incision, and this is some stream incision I documented in the early 2000s after the remeandering of Nippersink Creek. So this doesn't have anything particular to do with Beaver, but I want to show you an example of how deeply streams can entrench and how rapidly they can do it when something destabilizes them. Maybe like 300 years ago when Beaver were removed, or more recently when Nippersink Creek was put back into these meander bends in which it had not flowed since the 1950s. You can see between 2000 and 2008, it goes down about 5.4 feet. So that is a huge downward movement. When I initially started doing this work, it was fairly easy to wade across the stream. It became impossible eventually because the water was now way over my head in some of these pools, and I had to use a canoe to do some of the measurements. So this is just an example of how rapidly streams can erode when they're destabilized by some change in how water is flowing through them. Just a little bit more about stream incision. Here is a stream, it cuts down, okay? It's just a simple picture here, the upper stream to the lower one. What could cause that? One is a reduction in base level. Here are streams operating along an ocean where the level of the ocean goes down. This is very common during the Holocene, the last 10,000 years, as the ice volume on the Earth changed. Ocean levels went up and down. And as it goes down, this stream then erodes to a lower base level and has to cut into it and create this deep trough. So one of the reasons why streams can go down is their base level changes, or the stream can go up by the base level raising. If you raise the ocean back to this level, this would eventually fill in with sediment and the stream would agrade, or the bed would move upward. Or streams can go down by just a change in flow volumes and the erosivity of the channel. Classic picture of deep gullies in a farm field. You remove the natural vegetation, long periods of time where there's no crop to hold the soil, no vegetation to hold the soil. The water is focused at the surface, lots more stream runoff on the surface, and you get this gully development. And the deeper gully that goes, it more drains the groundwater and becomes deeper, and the stream becomes larger and more erosive. So which of these is really happens mostly with beaver influence on stream? And the beaver's influence is mostly by raising the base level. That's what it means when you put a pond on the stream, you form a new base level for the stream, the portion of the stream that's upstream of that beaver pond. So a series of beaver ponds means the effective base level for the stream is always nearby and it's relatively high, so the stream simply can't erode downward. This is just a graphic showing, trying to give you a picture of how what was happening in Nippersink Creek. It was both meandering. So here is a stream that's meandering this way. So this is the outside of a bend. This is the cut bank of the stream. It's meandering and it's eroding downward and meandering. This is how Nippersink Creek has evolved over the last few hundred years. The cut banks get steeper and the stream gets deeper. This is exactly what you're seeing right here. This is a picture in the springtime. The winter erosion has undermined this bank. This is a collapsing bank with all the canary grass sod coming down into the water. If you came back to this exact same spot, by the end of the summer, the water would have washed all of that away, and most of that sediment is headed downstream toward Fox Lake. So this is one of the problems of streams that cut down deeply and are free flowing and then have this huge tall cut bank as you have massive sediment inputs to the stream on a frequent basis that muddies the water for native fish and mussels, and eventually it causes economic problems when it goes downstream into Fox Lake, and that has to be dredged out. So this whole idea of beaver in our streams has important consequences for people too. We'll talk about some difficulties of where beaver impact neighbors but also beaver moving into an area by damming up water reduce water movement, and so it increases water storage. Well, when you increase water storage, whether it's by changing a drained farm field to a prairie, or putting in or allowing beaver to pond up a landscape, is that you increase water storage in a landscape. And when you increase water storage in a landscape, you decrease flooding downstream. So while beaver may induce local flooding in some places, overall, they're reducing major flooding downstream by simply increasing the water storage in the landscape. Another picture of this is right at the north edge of the park. This is an actual survey of the land here. This will be the stream surface, the current stream surface. And these are our land levels. This is the highest land level in this area. This would have been a terrace of Nippersink Creek when probably, let's say, at a pre-European settlement time, the hypothetical stream level probably a foot below that. That erodes downward, and you have another terrace over here of a lower level of Nippersink Creek. As it's entrenching gradually into the landscape, you have another hypothetical stream surface below that, and then you go down to the present stream surface and the present terrace level. This is how Nippersink Creek has evolved over the last few centuries. Once you take beaver out of it, it starts eating into the landscape and meandering, and you create these multiple terrace levels along the creek.
Hey, Tom. I
Go
got
ahead.
a question in the chat. How do muskrat lodges look different than beavers?
Well, muskrat lodges are typically smaller, and they're made almost entirely out of cattails. Muskrat are not wood eaters, so they're both smaller, and they're made out of cattails or river bulrush, any sort of herbaceous material they can find. So it's both a matter of size and the building material, but both of them, in a sense, similar in that the entrances are below water for protection against predators, and they're out in the middle, generally toward out into the water of the pond.
Thank you.
We're gonna have a little bit of an interview talking about our changes in beaver populations and beaver management. This is Gabe Powers, our manager in natural resources.
Gabe, you noticed any changes in beaver populations during your time here and their effect on our sites?
The thing is, just the population in general has increased since the time that I've been here. As far as impacts on our sites, definitely in the areas that we have allowed them to do some of the ecological engineering work, they've created some wetlands, created some diversity in those wetlands. As far as impacts offsite, we have a lot more nuisance wildlife complaints, so that type of impact is occurring to neighbors, and that amount of complaints have increased over time. I think that's a couple reasons that's happening. One is the population in general is increasing for a number of reasons. The habitat's gotten a lot better since the time I've been here, and then also the lack of trapping that occurs due to the market. The beaver market has reduced quite a bit. When I first started, I think you're getting about $50 per beaver, and now it's $5.
How has beaver management changed over the years?
As far as with the district, or
How the district handles beaver.
well, it hasn't changed a ton. I think it has to do with the population levels. We're just doing more of it, and then we're also getting more creative about how we manage beaver. In particular, some of the beaver deceiver type products that we've used out there, specifically for whenever we have a water control structure, because they'll hear that running water and they'll plug up the water control structure. For people that don't know, a water control structure is something that we have placed. It's an engineered product that we have placed in order to restore wetlands. So they'll go in and they will increase the water level, and we have water control structures so that we people can modify the water level, but they'll plug those up so they are in control of the water level. So we've had to create these beaver deceiver type devices as a water level control structure. The beaver deceiver is a trademark name that I forget who created it, but water control type devices so that the beavers are excluded from that structure.
Okay. So in general, that's like a way to manage beaver, at least sometimes, without having to get rid of them.
Exactly. It allows them to still exist in the natural area and allows us to still manipulate the water level independent of their activities. Or we'll also use those control devices if there is a non-lethal approach to some type of other nuisance complaint. So all of our nuisance complaints are handled in a case-by-case basis because there's thousands of variables to each individual complaint based on a number of different parameters, both ecological and human dimension type things, or even human development. If there's a drainage way or pipe or some type of engineered structure, that's going to create a different variable for how we're going to approach nuisance wildlife complaints.
Thank you, Gabe.
You bet.
This is a picture, it was painted for the district, and the question came up when we were doing this about whether that was a beaver or an otter. And I actually talked to the artist, Nancy Williamson, assured me that this was an otter. And the head is narrower, more rounded, and its ear is smaller. The beaver actually has a larger ear. Beaver spend enough time above ground, out of the water, foraging for wood. I suspect the larger ear allows them to hear predators better. Has a deeper, because of those huge, powerful jaws, has a deeper head than in this image. But to me, the kicker here is look at the beaver's feet. The beaver carries its feet ahead of it when it's swimming. The otter is carrying its feet backward or in a paddling motion back here. So that tucking the feet under the end. So when you visit Lost Valley Visitor Center, look at this beautiful painting. It is a river otter.
Gabe, you noticed any change? Gabe,
this is the beaver deceiver that Gabe talked about. A couple of, we'll look at two people's names. This is Skip Lyle. We'll talk about another, or see a picture name of another person who are really instrumental in really revolutionizing beaver management. So you've got a dam here, and the beaver build this dam and it starts flooding it, and someone's property is going underwater, or a road is going underwater, and well, what are you going to do? Well, you go out and you trap the beaver. So you take the beaver out, you break up the dam. What's the problem with that? Well, the problem is that if it's a stream that beaver can dam, even if you've gotten rid of those beaver, other ones are going to come, they're going to build the dam again. And you'll have to remove those beaver and break up that dam. And so this is a way, this is not just, it is, you might think of it as a humane solution, but it's also an economically effective solution because you can allow the one family of beaver to stay there, to build the dam, to keep the dam, but not allow it to flood nearby territory. And because those beaver are there, other beaver can't move in. So what we do here is we have this pipe, and the pipe then determines the maximum water level. And because the outlet of the pipe is over here, it's the sound of running water that beaver are attracted to and will instinctively start to dam up. And if you put that pipe well past this side of the dam, they really can't stop water from coming out of the pipe there, and they can't stop water from going into the pipe here because you put it into a wire cage. So in this way, you can create this engineered solution to control water level in the beaver pond while keeping the beaver in the pond and not removing them. Extremely clever, useful device. Here is one in practice. This is Mike Callahan and I. He and Skip Lyle worked together at some point. Here you can see he's covered the outlet here, I guess to just keep beaver out. So the inlet is out here in the pond underwater, surrounded by a cage to prevent beaver from getting into the tube. And this tube then sets the maximum water level for that pond. The tube has to be large enough that even in a heavy rain event, that it will be able to handle that overflow, because if the water starts topping the beaver dam, it can start to break the beaver dam down, and that's not what you want to have happen. You want to keep this pipe in place. Beaver are not just either, you can think of beaver as a problem, you can think of them as a solution, but they're either or both in both Europe and Asia and in North America. While the beaver have a different chromosome level, they look the same, they act the same, they create dams and they create water. And because people like to live near water, it frequently runs into conflicts between beaver and people. And here you see a beaver deceiver installed in Slovenia. Again, inlet is out here in the pond, caged in so beaver can't plug in, and the outlet is well past the top of the beaver dam. Another picture here just surrounding these culverts, because water trickling through the culverts is exactly what would attract beaver to these culverts, and they would start building these culverts up and start flooding the area on the near side where this picture was taken from. Beaver dam analogs are another item. This is kind of the opposite of the beaver deceiver, in that what you're actually trying to do here is either put in a structure that substitutes for the beaver, but if it's going to last for very long, it also has to attract the beaver. So you're driving stakes into the ground, weaving sticks in there, and probably packing mud to create an artificial beaver dam. But the point of this is to try to attract the real McCoy in there to maintain the dam. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back there and fix it every year. That's not going to hold that wooden material for very long. Beaver will keep reinforcing and rebuilding the dam and maintaining it. And so you're, with a beaver dam analog, you're actually trying to attract beaver as opposed to trying to get rid of them. This is, to me, this is the beaver hypothesis. And this has become really fundamental to how I think about, and I think a lot of people need to think about, the rivers and streams and wetlands of McHenry County. I mean, if you start looking at streams, and this is not an unusual condition, this is the default condition of streams in McHenry County, is they have entrenchment and bank erosion. Those steep banks along the sides of streams are not a natural feature, if by natural you mean that's the way they've always been. They have evolved into that condition over the last few hundred years, and probably, depending on the stream, the situation may have been worsened by other changes even in more recent times. But those deeply entrenched streams with those tall cut banks aren't in most cases, there are probably some exceptions to that rule, but in most cases, those aren't natural historical features. That's how the streams have evolved to look once beaver have been changed and the hydrology of the landscape has been transformed. And the basic question I asked myself then, and I'd ask you now, is how could streams have flowed through the landscape for 15, 16, 18,000 years and not have created those incised streams and cut banks? Yes, things are different now, and we drain landscapes and streams are more erosive, but that would be remarkable that you could have, I mean, that just 2 orders of magnitude faster erosion. There's something else going on, and when you look at beaver dams in the landscape today, you see how they affect streams like Cowpie Creek, where 80% of the length of that stream, 80% of the drop was taken up by beaver dams. So there essentially was very little of the stream left that could do any erosion, either to the banks or the stream bed. And you look at the frequency of those dams, you really come up with a very, very different picture of how the stream systems in McHenry County looked 300 years ago, and how remarkably different the wetland hydrology of the county was at that time. So I hope what I've done today is to really reinforce just how vitally important beaver are to our wetlands and streams in the county. Not just the county, the Midwest of North America. When in the 19th century, there were experts who speculated that the concentration of waterfowl in the Midwest of North America was the most dense on Earth. And so this was in the middle of the 19th century, really long after beaver had been eliminated. All the beaver ponds, or at least most of them, where ducks were breeding, were gone. Try to imagine the landscape 300 years before that, just how common waterfowl must have been in a landscape with beaver ponds. So this is hugely important to the restoration of all of our wetlands and streams in McHenry County. It's also important to people because even though beaver cause problems, as I said before, beaver can cause local flooding problems. And of course, it's important if it's your property. And the more we can slowly begin to integrate those solutions where we can live with beaver as opposed to removing them, the lower the cost will be to beaver management. And the more water will be stored in the landscape. And the more water you store in the landscape, the less severe is flooding problems downstream. We've shown that over and over and over again with wetland restoration and natural areas restoration, that when you allow the landscape to store water, you reduce flooding problems downstream. That's a huge problem in the Midwest. It causes more loss of life in the country and more property damage than any other force of nature. And a lot of that is our fault. And so beaver are just one small part of that solution. How can we learn to live with beaver? Well, I think part of it are those engineering solutions we talked about today. And there's every reason to do that for the reasons I've just mentioned. But I think the bigger problem is the people problem. And we all know we couldn't run into this over and over again in conservation. The real limitation of conservation isn't our physical technologies. It's not having tractors or chainsaws or whatever we use in restoration. That's not the limitation. The limitation is people and people's support for what we're doing. And that's critically important to the future of beaver management of this county and throughout the Midwest, is that we learn to live with beaver. And then we begin to naturalize beaver, not just naturalize them into the landscape, but naturalize them into how we think about rivers and streams in McHenry County and how they're supposed to function. And as we change that human perspective on beaver, we'll start to change the way we can manage beaver in the county. That's a long-term process, but it's one we need to work on. And you need to be a part of that change. You need to become part of that change in how you talk to people about beaver and beaver management and about the importance of beaver to the rivers, streams, and wetlands of McHenry County. Well, that's all for today. Me and my buddy here, I'll say so long, but I'm certainly ready for any questions you'd like to ask about beaver or any of the things that we've talked about today.
Sam, and if you need a reminder on how to ask questions, we can take those in the chat. We can also have you unmute and ask your question. We do have one in the chat. I'm kind of just filling time in case people are typing. First question we have is, have beaver tried to build upon the riffles placed in the nipper sink?
Actually, yes, they have done that several times over the years. I mean, shouldn't be surprising. They were damming the nipper sink for thousands and thousands of years before that, and they try to build dams across the nipper sink. That's one of here's a problem where beaver dams and our human use of the park conflict with one another. As I say, that's the most heavily used kayaking and canoeing stream in the Chicago region, and we simply can't, as much as the ecologist in me would love to see that as a series of beaver ponds today, we can't allow beaver to do that. It's, yeah, I'd like to have an alternative universe where I could do that just to see what Nippersink would look like as a series of ponds across that valley. Much of the valley in Glacial Park is actually an old glacial lake plain, so it's very flat and level, and probably only a few dams scattered along its length would have flooded extensive areas of the valley.
We had a question about, would it be okay to contact you about speaking at an event hosted by local organizations?
Sure, I do that pretty frequently. I don't think I've given a talk about beaver before, but about many other subjects over the years. So certainly you can contact me.
And I put Tom's email address in the chat. You know, depending on the topic and the timing, we can of course get back to you about that.
Hey,
Looks
Tom?
like we have Joe unmuted. Go ahead and ask.
Tom, I was just wondering, do the beavers help the wetlands, and does that help the greenhouse effect and the pollution of the air? Does it with
Well,
keep
certainly beaver would have, I mean, if we can sort of blink our eyes and go back 500 years, a fully beaver inhabited North American landscape would have been much wetter. Because of that wetness, it would have stored organic matter in the soils, both in and adjacent to those wetlands. Land drainage in any form, whether it's through tile drainage or just breaking up beaver dams or trapping the beaver, all of that drainage ends up reducing carbon storage in the soils and sediments. And that, again, only accelerates carbon dioxide in the air. I mean, if you think of it just in Glacial Park, it doesn't seem like very much, but you take that whole pattern of land drainage all across the Midwest, and you start thinking these are really big numbers of carbon stored in the soil that's now in the air.
Tom, I have one more question.
Okay.
Well, I decided, no, forget it. I'm just going to leave it to Beaver.
Okay.
Thank you.
I used to watch Leave It to Beaver when I was young, Joe, me and you. I don't know how many of our viewers shared that experience.
Wanted to add a note when you were talking about flooding that it was a few years ago. I think there was actually a change to the floodplain maps for McHenry County, showing some of the wetland restorations where we had downstream. One of the bigger projects had reduced actually the 100-year floodplain lines, so they had to update the floodplain maps, which was pretty cool.
This is a truism. It's I think for some people a little hard to believe, but the drainage of the Midwest is both part and parcel of agricultural productivity and the cost of the food you buy in a grocery store. Okay, so we're all a part of the problem of land drainage. It's not just nasty farmers or nasty developers, or that we're all a part of this. We're all a part of the way our civilization lives in the Midwestern landscape, and a part of that is land drainage. We need to work in the future toward finding ways to store more water in the landscape. That is important for me as an ecologist. Important for wetland stream restoration, wildlife. For people, it's important because it greatly reduces flooding downstream, and flooding is a horrific cause of natural disaster and loss of human life every year. So there's every reason to try to address this problem. Beaver is just, again, one small part of that solution.
A question in the chat: have you noticed any change in cattail and Phragmites density after beavers occupy a wetland?
Well, it doesn't, I mean, beaver do cut a lot of vegetation, much like muskrats. They use it a lot in their dams. I mean, the woody material is most prominent, but a lot of those dams along Cowpie that I was looking at were a lot of cattails and other herbaceous material. Beaver are not, as far as I know, their food supply is really the inner bark of those woody plants. Sorry, I didn't really mention that. That's unfortunate. But anyway, I can mention it now. Aspen and willow, if you're trying to attract beaver, plant a lot of aspen and willow near water, and you'll stand a better chance of attracting beaver because they're prime food supplies. When you get beaver into an area, those areas that are deeply flooded and continually flooded will kill cattail. The cattail and common reed will be growing around the edges of the pond, but areas that are deeply flooded, continuously flooded, it will kill some of those some of that emergent vegetation. So we had a couple of pictures of those beaver ponds we visited in Glacial Park. You notice there's that large open pond area. If the beaver dams weren't there, much more of that would have been closed in by the emergent vegetation.
And just a side note, I put this in the chat earlier, but any of the beaver dam locations that we mentioned, none of these are accessible by trails, and it's not really allowed for members of the public to go off trail. So please don't go looking for them. And we wanted to show you and give you a different perspective of what this looks like in terms of our management for them. You still have a chance to put some questions in the chat or unmute and ask. We had a couple comments of, loving to watch Leave It to Beaver, and thanks for a wonderful presentation.
Right. Well, it just occurred to me, I wonder if it would be possible one day to have a public program where we could take people in to see a beaver dam, and under control, obviously escorted by district staff. I'll just thinking out loud. That would be a fun thing to do, but we'll see. Anyway, yes, you cannot go into the beaver dams right now. All of them, beaver don't build them right next to the road where you can see them easily. So they're off a ways and a little hard to find. Anyway.
Another question in the chat. Not sure if I'm understanding this correctly, so feel free to clarify, but it says, would beavers be helpful in a pond the size of a football field?
Well, beaver can create very large wetlands. They can, beaver will inhabit a pond. Beaver can live in a pond without making the pond. If a pond is created by, some sort of human-made dam, beaver will come and live in the pond, and if you stop them from, they'll have a tendency to go to wherever the overflow of that pond is and try to dam it up. But if you stop them from doing that, they'll still live in the pond. They'll simply burrow into the bank to form their lodges. So they can live in very large ponds. I really don't know if there are any beaver in the Great Lakes per se, but certainly in large pond areas, I've seen them burrowing into the bank for lodges. So they can live in very large ponds, and they can impound. Beaver dams can get really huge, so they can impound a lot of water. It doesn't get to be hugely deep, but in fairly level terrain, like the Valley of Nipperson Creek, it would have been interesting if we could go back and get an aerial photograph from around the year 1500. Unfortunately, there wasn't anybody flying over the park at that time, so we don't have an aerial photograph. But I suspect because it's such a flat-lying area, some of those ponds are really very large.
I had a suggestion in the chat. How about a sight seldom seen visit to a beaver dam? I know our education department usually handles our sight seldom seen programs. We can certainly make a suggestion. I would imagine some of the
we would need to restrict it to people with waders on, or maybe we could do it in a hot summer month when people can go without waders. Because anyway, that's a fun. To me, that would be a very fun program.
Fun idea. A bit of a challenge to get out there. We made light of it with the video, but it did take us like a half hour to 45 minutes of chopping through ice to get to some of these. So
trying to do it in the ice would be not the prime time of year. Yeah, we would probably, if we could do a program like that, and we'd have to talk amongst ourselves about the practicality. If we could do that program, it would most certainly be during the growing season when the
Yeah,
water.
so no guarantees.
We'll try.
Any other questions out there?
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming today. This is given that, compare some of the other subjects I've done, like talking about trees or flowers. This is a relatively recent, as in 10 to 15 year interest of mine. I've been doing lots of other things during that 10 to 15 years. Whereas I've been teaching about trees for 40 years. Whereas this, it's a recent interest, but it's an incredibly important interest. Beaver in the landscape is, I mean, here we have a situation where the solution, we don't have to pay for it. All we have to do is learn how to use it. The beaver will re-inhabit a landscape on their own if we can learn how to live with them whenever possible. There will be situations where that's not possible, but wherever it's possible. So I hope you take that with you today, and we start looking at beaver as an opportunity rather than as a problem. That's the important thing, to understand their importance and to look at beaver as beaver or beavers as an opportunity and not a problem. Thank you.
We had another question pop up in the chat.
Okay.
Will muskrat and beaver inhabit the same pond?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's nothing about the two lifestyles that would interfere with one another. They're eating different things and wouldn't conflict with one another. Likewise, you'll have otter feeding in the same pond. You have muskrats feeding in the pond, and you have beaver, building dams and building lodges in a pond. That's one of the. I mean, beaver wetlands are a boon to wildlife in general. So it's a from a strictly conservation point of view, it's a win-win situation. The problem comes in the interface between beaver and natural areas and the surrounding human population. So that's the challenge of conservation going forward. If we didn't have enough challenges, now we've got one more, and those challenges always come down to communicating to the human population, that population of people, and selling conservation to them. That's not something that will ever be done. It's something we all have to work at. And now you're part of the beaver. You're part of the beaver believer army now.
And we had a comment in there. Thank you. We're working hard to make it easier to live with beavers with a little heart emoji. So thank you.
Okay.
I wanted to add, we'll try to get this video posted if you would like to come back to it for reference within a day or two. Again, you can check it out on our Tom Talks playlist on our @DiscoverMCCD channel. And there's many other webinars on there. Our next set of webinars, I believe for February, is when we are trying something a little bit more podcast in style of shorter 15-minute sessions where we're focusing mostly on questions. And so there will be from February through beginning of March, once a week, these shorter tiny Tom Talks, although maybe we'll switch that to Tom's Tiny Talks later on. We had another question. Do beavers alter their behaviors to not create dams, just such as in the Chicago and Des Plaines river systems?
Well, as I say, beaver can live in the banks. I mean, even though Nippersink Creek is not dammed up by beaver, there are beaver living in Nippersink Creek in bank burrows. So they can do that perfectly well. And because Nippersink Creek doesn't dry out completely or only freakishly so in super drought years, beaver are perfectly happy living in a stream. What beaver need is the water. The water is protection for their lodge. But they don't need the dam. They instinctually will make the dam, and they'll try to dam up Nippersink Creek and or any other creek that they're in, but they don't. What they need is the water, and the dam is the means to get the water. If they have the water, without their own dam, then they'll live in the place without building a dam, but they'll try to dam up any running water and increase the depth of the water.
Thank you. I think that's the last one. So,
Okay, well, thank you again, and I'll look forward to seeing you at the next Tom Talk.
thank you. Guys, have a great day.